So how is it going for you guys? Any questions to last week's material? Or
so with the last assignment, right? The evaluation, you actually want us to walk through and do those exercises?
Yeah, if you can.
Okay. Okay,
if
cool.
it's too harsh, I mean, these are orthopedic serious exercises. It's a series that they do to evaluate people, in terms of their, the weekend warrior type of injuries that come up, right?
Right.
So if we go through those, strengthening things like the squats, but also stretching, like figuring out if the hamstring are loose enough. And we go through these, I think it's 10 or 12 or something activities, then we get an idea of where are our weak links when we want to be active. And so that's why I put that in there. It teaches us, of course, about the muscles as well, that we're doing right now, but it's also useful for you guys or for me too, and I should do it again too, because it's been a while, to see where are the weak links and where should we, if we want to have a training thing, what should we focus on a little bit? So yeah, walk your way through those, get a couple of, make sure you spend enough time, do it a couple of times, not all at once maybe. And if it hurts, don't do it. If it's giving you grief, don't worry about it. Then just stop it. You can text me. We can talk about what could be the problem. Make sure you feel all right about what's going on, but that way at least you're also getting something really valuable for yourself, hopefully, or for a lot of you guys. Okay. And if there is anybody else have anything on top of their head, because if not, I'm going to go through the terms. I think that usually helps pretty much if we talk about what we did last week a little more, and you can chime in. And again, if you have anything, do not raise your hand, just talk into me, because then I don't have to worry about always looking at what's going on, which is a little hard if I share the screen, which I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to go to PowerPoint here. So that last week we did the upper extremity muscles. How did that go for you guys? Because that's pretty heavy.
It was definitely a lot to intake, but again, how you have the booklet set up and the objective points, it's kind of pretty easy to breeze through. You just have to understand the terminology and what that muscle is for.
Right, and a lot of the terminology we can get some help by slowing everything down and looking at the names. Like for example, levator, like it lifts something up, scapula, it lifts the scapula up and anchors it to the neck. And so those are sort of, it makes it a little easier to then remember what would it be, and what are those landmarks. So names are often done by what the muscle does, or where it's located as well, or sometimes how it looks as well. Like for example, the muscle rhomboid here, you see how that's like two parallel surfaces, not in a right angle. That's a rhomboid geometric form. So when I look at the upper extremities, I try to group muscles together. So what I do is I group, the first set of muscles is shoulder blade anchoring to the trunk muscles. And so when we look at the upper extremities, the shoulder blade is sort of, and then the clavicle a little in the front, but the shoulder blade is really sort of the crossroads between the trunk and then the arm, and then we can move the arm around. So shoulder blade muscles to the trunk are fairly, they do have some movement, obviously, but they're also really strong anchoring muscles to anchor that upper extremity into the trunk. When I look at some of those muscles, the first one on the list is the serratus anterior. And when I look at the serratus anterior, that's a muscle that comes from the underside of the shoulder blade and strongly anchors into each of the ribs and looks like a serrated knife. If you look on this side, that's why they call it serrated anterior. There's a posterior one. We don't worry about that. That's why they have to say this is the anterior one. But it's a muscle that anchors the shoulder blade from they call that the vertebral border. So that's the back border. So that's this part right in here. underneath where that muscle comes from. So they flipped that back on this picture. Oops. So that muscle is pretty neat. And, you know, it has these actions, but what I really often, you know, actions are movements, but with the scapular muscles, yeah, that's the case. But I also want to reiterate that it's really a lot about holding the shoulder blade into the trunk and anchoring it. Yeah, you have a question?
No, I was gonna say, is those the finger-like muscles?
Yeah, on the side.
Yeah,
Like this, you can see it, how it comes out a little bit
that's
here.
how I remember what that is, because when I did the questions, it said finger-like muscles, and that was the only one to me that looked like almost like a fist balled up, you know?
It is. And you see here, this guy holding up himself, the shoulder blade is squeezed to the trunk. That's one of those actions that muscle does. It protracts the scapula, which holds it against the chest. If the muscle is wimpy and it's not strong enough and it can't hold it, you see a winging. So this will pull back, the scapula would move backwards a little bit. So you could see that potential if that's
good to
fine.
know.
Huh?
I said, that's good to know.
Yeah. A lot of times the winging scapula has to do with this muscle being a little not quite as firm. And again, these are, we want motion in the shoulder blade, but we don't want excessive motion in the shoulder blade. You know, we want to, a lot of it is holding. The next muscle I got there is the levator. And we just mentioned that before, the levator scapula, the elevator of the shoulder blade, is attached on the top corner of the shoulder blade and then anchors into the neck. And so it goes all the way to vertebra C1 and C2, so high up, but it's a really involved muscle. It's a very thick muscle. It's hard to see that, how thick it is. You can see here a little bit, but it's a pretty strong anchor. Overlying it is what we talked last time. We talked about the trapezius. And I think the trapezius probably, well, it's not on the list here because we had it on the list for the trunk muscles, but the trapezius is overlying. So the deeper muscle very often hold things in place and the superficial muscles move things around. It kind of makes logical sense once you think about it, because if you move a lot of the shoulder blade with the deep muscle, that kind of would be weird how, you know, structurally, and the superficial muscles will move that. So as I think about it over time, I learned to appreciate that if a muscle is deeper, I'm thinking it's more of a holding type muscle. Again, it's not a hard rule, but if the muscle is more superficial, I'm expecting it to do much more movement. And you can see that in a trapezius, for example, has a lot of movement going on in that. So the levator scapula lifts the shoulder blade up, and you can also see if it contracts here, if it pulls this up, you think there is a center of rotation around here in the shoulder blade, it will pull this shoulder blade this way. So the glenoid cavity will move downward. Can you visualize that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. I know, silence. Huh?
No, can you
No,
show us, like, do a movement that does that?
Huh? Say that again, Secret.
Can you lift your arm and give us an example of what you're saying?
Well, no, you're not working on the arm. It's just if you contract this muscle here, the scapula, you consider, you think like a wheel. You think this is a wheel, and the center of the wheel is around here. And so this stays stable. So this doesn't move, more or less, right? And so if this contracts and it moves the shoulder blade up, automatically it will bring it downward. It will rotate it if this doesn't move. It doesn't just pull it up that altogether. It will actually sort of like you anchor it here and then see where the wheel will go. And if you move this upward, this part will go downward. That makes sense?
So I'm trying to envision, like, are you pulling your elbow out to the side like a chicken wing, or like
No, you're not doing anything. The muscle's attached. The muscle. Wait, hold on. The muscle's attached here on the shoulder blade. And if that goes up when you move, the shoulder moves downward. So this goes up and then this goes down. So it rotates it. It's like this motion.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
If that's a little hard, don't go too deep on it. That's pretty involved.
Well, I was just trying to envision, like, what movement would equal what you were saying.
Yeah. No, it's the rotation. This is the rotation, glenoid cavity down. That's that motion.
So like what he's doing in this picture.
No, he's stretching it.
Oh, okay, got you. He's just stretching the muscle to the side.
Yeah. If it were contracting and it shortens. Contracting always shortens the muscle. So the shoulder blade gets pulled upward. But because it's sort of fixated by other muscles and sort of stuck in this here, it will not move. This part won't move, so it rotates instead of just lifting it up.
So basically,
Huh?
neck to side head motions would contract that muscle, right?
Yeah, that's another motion.
Yeah,
You can also
what
have
I was
the neck
thinking.
all
Yeah.
over to the side with it as well. Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's sort of, these words are fine, but at the end of the day, we want to try to visualize, and then we can go back and put the words on it. And in the test, you guys don't have to know all these details, right? And that's partly why I'm doing it that way. I want you guys to understand it without all the little, technical language, because it's at the end, that's more important, I think. So let's then move on to the rhomboid. And so now we have the muscle up here, and then the rhomboids are further down. So we go, the levator was sort of up here, and then the rhomboids are further down, moving the shoulder blade or anchoring the shoulder blade to the vertebral column right in here. And so they are basically pulling the shoulder blade backwards, but they're really holding it in place. Because now what we have, if we have a muscle that comes from underneath, that was the serratus. We have a levator scapula and a rhomboids in the back that hold it in. And then we just have to we have one more muscle in the front, and that's the pectoralis major. No, minor, sorry, wherever that went. Here it is. And the pectoralis minor is attached to the coracoid process, that little weird stump in the front of the shoulder blade. This is a shoulder blade. And then it goes in the front of the rib cage on the upper ribs. And so it pulls the shoulder blade downward from that angle. So now we have every sort of, the inside is covered with the muscle to hold it in, the front is covered with the muscle to hold it downward, and the back has two muscles that anchor it into the trunk posteriorly. So we kind of have this, from three sides, we anchor that shoulder blade into the trunk. So that's pretty strong and pretty firm. Although we have to appreciate the shoulder is very flexible, and with that flexibility comes vulnerability. So we do get a lot of injuries in the shoulder, and a lot of times the rib cage is involved because the shoulder blade is anchored so deeply into the rib cage. So that's what, when I look at a shoulder pain, I look at the rib cage, I look at the humerus themselves, I look at the clavicle position, some also a little of the scapular position, the shoulder blade, although that's a lot of that is with muscle, feeling what muscles are really stiff and tight. But anyway, that's sort of the first set of muscles that how I approach the upper extremities. And then from there, so that's these muscles here, and then these muscles in here. And then from there, we go to the muscles that hold the arm into the shoulder blade. So that would be the rotator cuff muscles, the sits muscles. They call them sits because it's the mnemonic for supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. And so those are the ones that attach the humerus to the scapula. And they are in the back of the shoulder blade, and then three of the muscles are in the back of the shoulder blade, and one of the muscles in the front of the shoulder blade. And this is where we have the spine of the shoulder blade, the spine of the scapula is the landmark. The muscle above it is the supraspinatus, so above the spine of the scapular muscle. And the one below is the infraspinatus, infra referring as inferior, as below the spine of the scapula. And then deep here, we got one little strangler that's kind of almost part of the infraspinatus, but it's a different name. It's called the teres minor muscle. It's attached at the edge of the shoulder blade towards the arm, and then goes fairly below into the the greater tubercle on the arm. And then below the scapula, we have a muscle called the subscapularis. So the underneath, sub means below, like submarine, below the below the sea level, or below the sea. Sub is below. Scapularis refers to scapula. And then that muscle goes from really all the way on the subscapular fossa and anchors into the lesser tubercle here. And together they anchor the humerus into the shoulder blade. They also, though, move the arm around. Let me see if we have a movement thing here. And basically what you do is you have the elbow, if you have the elbow bent, the muscles on the back of the shoulder blade move the arm this way, external rotation, and the one underneath, the subscapular, moves the arm this way, internal rotation. And so that's sort of the motion that the rotator cuffs do. And when you go to PT and you have rotator cuff problems, you basically have a rubber band pulling one way and then the other way, and you do the motions and strengthen the muscle that way. And so that's one of the classic ways of doing that. How are those muscles? You guys understanding those?
Yes.
Good, 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 good. And then from there, now we're moving into muscles that move. Sorry about that. Move the arm around. When I say arm, I'm meaning, in technically speaking, we're calling the humerus the arm. The ulnar radius area is called the forearm when we go with the anatomy, how they say these things. So when I say arm, it's really the brachial area, the humerus. And so when we look at the motion of the humerus, we're looking at muscles that are more attached again in the trunk, but more superficially now. They're not anchoring the shoulder blade, they're moving the arm around. So we got a few there. We got the pec major in the front, we got the deltoid on the side, and then we got the latissimus dorsi, blah, 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 all the way in the back this way. When I start with the, we also have the coracobrachialis and the teres major. Those are the ones that are the huh? Oh, sorry. So I start with the pec major, the pectoralis major. We had a muscle on the bottom we just talked about. The pec minor goes from here inward. So the shoulder blade anchoring muscle in the front. The pec major is the muscle that's laying on top. And so that's the thick muscle. You can grab that muscle under the armpit like that. That's pectoralis major muscle for the most part. So it goes from all here in the front of the humerus into the chest medially. Some clavicle and then some of the ribs here. So that's a pretty involved, strong muscle that moves the arm around. And so it brings the arm inward. It also medially rotates the arm. If you can visualize that a little, it's attached in between the greater and lesser tubercle. So it's fairly a little bit on the outside. So when it contracts, it turns that arm medially. So it helps the subscapularis muscle doing this, bringing the hand medially when the elbow is bent. So that's that motion. That's pretty much it for the pec major. That's a pretty easy muscle to spot if you have to label that. The pectoralis, no, that's the pec major. And then another one we have, there's the coracobrachialis that I do have on the list because it's a very small muscle. It doesn't do that much, but it's a helper muscle. When we look at the motion in the body, we usually have one muscle that does the main motion. That's called the prime mover or the main mover. And then other ones that help that muscle motion are called synergists. So they're helping the whole thing. Syn means SYN means together. And the coracobrachialis is actually fairly easy to understand because it goes from the coracoid process in the front of the shoulder blade to the brachium. And the brachium is the humerus. The brachial area is the upper arm area. So that's why I wanted to remember those areas in the body, because we got the coracobrachialis as the first muscle in a series that has that brachial terminology in the muscle word. Then another muscle that is here is the latissimus dorsi. So we had the pectoralis major in the front, and in the back we have the latissimus dorsi muscle, and that is a huge muscle. Look at Michael Phelps. This is his pectoral, it's his latissimus dorsi muscle. These guys are good swimmers too, but look at the difference. They have not much in comparison. I mean, way more than I do, but he is huge. That's why he's such a powerful swimmer too. Because that motion is really the crawling motion that's bringing the arm down and underneath the body, and that's that swimming motion. So that muscle is attached on, again, actually at the same place as the pectoralis major, a little in the front on the side, in that intertubercular groove. And then it goes all the way to the spine and also the iliac area in the pelvis. They call that, see that here, thoracolumbar fascia is this white stuff that everything anchors in that comes into the back. Similar to that linea alba we had in the front, in the stomach muscle, it's just in the back. And of course, it's more massive in the back, a lot of back muscles. That's the latissimus dorsi. And the latissimus dorsi, as you can see here, it travels upward, it just bypasses or covers that shoulder blade inferior angle there, and then it goes into the arm. And it has a little cousin. And the little cousin is attached at that inferior angle of the shoulder blade and goes to the same place as the latissimus dorsi goes. And it's called the teres major. So you really look at the teres major as a helper muscle to the latissimus dorsi. And the teres major goes to the arm on the inside here, and the teres minor, which was the muscle of the we had that as a rotator cuff, starts right here and then goes out to here. And so that's the difference there. So that's, small, but significant. Obviously, where the muscles attach will dictate what motion it does. So the teres major helps the latissimus dorsi, and that basically brings the arm down, a little medial rotation, and then extension brings it down and back, even past the body, and also adduction brings it into the body. As you can see, if this arm comes inward, that would be adduction. ADD is bringing a limb towards the midline. Abduction is bringing it out of the midline. So this is adduction. So I remember adduction as in adding something. So we're adding a limb to the trunk. So that's how I always remembered it. Good. And then we have on the side, we have a big muscle. It's called the deltoid. And the deltoid muscle wraps all the way around. I call it the coat jacket. Sometimes the coat jackets have a little padding in there. It's that, to me, that's sort of that muscle where that padding is. We have a portion that goes in the clavicle. We have a portion that goes around the acromion process. And then we even have a portion that goes into the spine of the scapula in the back. And they all anchor into the, guess what? Deltoid tuberosity. That's why we study that on the outside of the arm. And that does a lot of functions. It brings the arm outward. That's the main function. That's sort of what's here. But it also, the anterior fiber, you can see how that brings the arm forward and brings the arm backwards. So as the main function, the main mover, it's the abduction instead of the AD, the out, bringing the arm out. And then it's a synergist with a lot of the other motions that the pec does, pec major does, and also the latissimus and the teres major do. All right, so we're moving right along. You guys still good? Or are you getting bored or questions?
I'm here. I'm listening.
All right. I don't want to bore you.
Oh,
Make
no.
sure you tell me. So then from there, because now we're moving the arm around, and then from there, we're going to move the elbow around. And what motion does the elbow do? The elbow pretty much closes and opens. That's really, flexion and extension. That's really what it mainly does. And so we have muscles in the front of the forearm, of the upper arm. The muscles of the brachial area, the humeral area, are the ones that move the elbow. So the first one is the big one everybody kind of knows, is the biceps brachii. And that is, interestingly, it is actually attached on the shoulder blade itself, but it still reaches all the way down to the radius and the ulna, and mostly the radial tuberosity. And this is a ligament on the outside, but it goes into the ulna ultimately. And its main function is flexing the elbow, bringing the elbow joint, the arm closer to the shoulder. That's flexing the elbow. Also, you can see it's attached here on the radius, and down in here in the radius and the ulna, we have this forearm. We can have, the forearm has to go up and down. It has to go palm up and palm down. And that motion, supination and pronation, crosses the radius over the ulna. And that function happens up here. And so when we have a palm down motion, that's palm down motion, the biceps goes nicely underneath it and anchors right into this radial tuberosity. And if it contracts, it rotates that radius the other way here. And that means we're supinating, we're turning the palm upward when we do that. So the biceps brachii is actually a really interesting muscle. It's got multiple functions. It's one of those muscles that crosses two joints. And that's not often the case. So we do have some function that does even happen up here, and the biceps can help in raising the arm up a little bit as well. We don't mention it here because he's just a synergist doing that. And again, these lists are not fully comprehensive. I try to, because if you look at the textbook, it very often gives you all these minute little details of where the thing is attached, and it's way too confusing for me. And I assume, therefore, it's also confusing for everybody else a little bit. That might be an assumption, but, and so I want to be more you understanding from a where it attaches versus just being able to name the stuff. The naming is secondary. So after the biceps, we lift
So
up.
anything you said, it attaches at the shoulder and at the ulna, right?
Yeah, it attaches into the shoulder blade.
Anterior proximal.
Yes, it actually goes in. It's interesting. It goes into the coracoid process in the front, and then in the second part, bi means two, so it has a seps means head. So this means that basically this means it's a two-headed muscle, which means we have one side of the attachments, at least one side has a split and has sort of two bellies to the muscle. And one of the attachments is in the inside, in the glenoid cavity, deep inside the shoulder joint. And so that muscle has some interesting stabilizing function up there as well. One thing that can happen is the tendon here goes into this intertubercular groove or sulcus, and it can flip out. It can come out. That could be a problem. So that's one of the syndromes that we have to look at if the upper arm shoulder is involved. Then underneath that muscle, we have the brachialis muscle. And look at that, another word. If you see that word brachii, you know it's in the arm somewhere. We have the coracobrachialis, biceps brachii, and now we're going to get the brachialis. And the brachialis is a deep muscle. It's fairly thick. This doesn't do it justice. See, here's the biceps, and underneath is the brachialis. It's a thick muscle. This is where the biceps is taken away. You see, it starts about mid-shaft of the humerus, and then it goes into the ulna. And it flexes. It's a very strong flexor of the elbow joint. And that's all it does, flexes the elbow joint. That's really its main function. But it's the strongest one doing that. And then going on the other side, now all these muscles flex the elbow. Now we got to bring the elbow, straighten it back out, and that's the extension. And in the back, we have a big muscle called the triceps brachii. And the triceps, tri means three. So this is not a two-headed muscle, two-bellied muscle. This is a three-bellied muscle, 1, 2, 3. And we're not in differentiating, but what I want, it's kind of a combination of the biceps brachii and the brachialis together. And so it's just one thick muscle in the back, but you see one part goes into the shoulder blade, this time not on the top of the glenoid, in the bottom of the glenoid cavity. Not that you need to really know that detail at this point, or remember. And then a lot of the other two parts start at the humerus in the back posteriorly and go into the olecranon process. That's where that comes in handy. That's the tip of the elbow where if you put your arm in the elbow, that's what you touch the table with. And so that is a thick ligament that goes into that olecranon. And you can just visualize when that contracts, that elbow straightens out. And so that's what that one does. Good. And if there's no questions, we can just move to the forearm. That's where we get a little tricky in the forearm. So the forearm muscles, the ones here, will move the wrist around, and some of them the finger. We don't really go into the finger muscles because there's a lot of layers. So we're really mostly focusing on the wrist motions. We have 4 muscles that we look at in the forearm. We have the pronator teres, the flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, and flexor carpi ulnaris. Oof, that's a lot of terminology. They all start at the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So that's the common origin, medial epicondyle. And then they reach around across the forearm. And we got 4 of them going across the forearm in 4 different little areas, so to speak. See, we have all these other ones too underneath, but we're not going to worry about those. So the first one is attached to the medial epicondyle, and then it goes straight across into the radius. And when it pulls on the radius, it pulls the radius over the ulna, and that gives us the pronation, the palm down. And so if you look at this name, pronator teres, teres refers to, I forgot what teres refers to. Oh, shoot. I got to look that up. But pronator is the muscle that pronates the wrist. It turns the palm downward. So that name is understandable, or at least it's the action, so it gives you some hint. And that muscle is the highest one up, that goes right across from the medial epicondyle over to the radius. And then we got the next muscle, and that's called the flexor carpi radialis. And you look at the word, flexor means bending, bringing the wrist more towards the forearm. Carpi means wrist. Radialis means it goes towards the radius. The radius is where the thumb is. Unfortunately, this picture is a little cut off. The radius is over here. And so the flexor carpi radialis goes from this area here and crosses over to the carpal on the thumb side, right here. And then we got another one next to it, and that's a long muscle that goes into the palm of the hand, and they call that the palmaris longus muscle because it goes to the palm of the hand. And if you look at here, this is a better picture, actually. Sorry about that. Pronator teres right in here. Flexor carpi radialis right in here. See the thumb side? And then look at the palmaris longus, goes all the way in the palm, and it splits into all these little white stuff with ligaments, tendony stuff, fascia type stuff. And it goes into the palm. And when you look at the wrist, you have the wrist is really interestingly complicated. You have a carpal tunnel. So the carpals are organized in a way that they create a little tunnel. And on the front side of the tunnel, you got a thick ligament. It's called the flexor retinaculum, and it holds all of that stuff together. And there's one muscle that doesn't go underneath that retinaculum, and that's the palmaris longus. So if you actually do this to your wrist, you bring it down, you can see there's tendon sticking up, and that's the palmaris longus tendon. About 10% of the population don't have that muscle. So if you're one of them and you can't find it, then don't worry about it. You still have to learn the name though. So it's not really that crucial of a muscle in terms of function. It's more like a helper muscle that sort of flexes the, the whole palm a little bit, brings it to the forearm. And then on the outside, we have one more, and that's known as the flexor carpi ulnaris. And that goes again, medial epicondyle, and then it goes to the the carpals on the pinky side, and that's where the ulna runs. So that's the flexor carpi ulnaris. Good. So we have 4 of those muscles. And this is the way that I studied this thing. So you take the web of the hand and put it next to the elbow on the other side. Oops, shoot. Elbow on the other side, and you lay the hands down. And you see how the fingers lay down. The one that goes right across is the pronator teres. The one that goes to the thumb side is the flexor carpi radialis. The one that goes all the way the middle downward is the palmaris longus. And the pinky is more on the pinky side, and that's the flexor carpi ulnaris. And so I always remember that way since chiropractic school. It seems to make sort of the most sense. So I like to share that one. If you have a better way to remember these, tell me. But hopefully, go ahead.
I have a question. When you're referring to the muscles, are you also always including the tendon as sort of just in the same expression?
Yes, because thank you for asking. That is actually a good question. The tendon is the connection between the meat of the muscle and the anchoring point in the bone. So tendons anchor muscles in the bone, and then ligaments is what anchors bone to bone.
So, but when mapping out sort of a muscle or muscle function, you're just assuming the expression of the tendon itself and that connection point.
Yes, we're just assuming that the tendon is what anchors. The tendon is what's non-contractile.
Yeah.
The tendon is sort of the rope that anchors it in, and then it gets pulled on.
Right.
So we're always looking at that together, yes. And the anchor, when you look at where the muscle goes into the bone, you're always going to look at the tendon. So it's always going to be white.
Yeah.
So the white is the tendon stuff, and the red is the meat of the muscle. That is the contractile element.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't too clear on that, huh?
Does
Well,
does the tendon have any contraction capability, or is it really essentially just like a flexible rope?
Common knowledge, it's just a flexible rope.
Mhm.
If there is anything behind, I'm not so sure. I would think not really, because it's really mostly collagen fibers.
Mhm.
And so it's not really myosin actin stuff. You got other cells that do have some contractile elements, but I think the tendon is really, traditionally, it is just a rope. But I think that is also, when we look at, further in the holistic way of looking at things, I think it's still just a rope.
Mhm. Okay.
And then when we got to turn the palm around, or we got to go to the backside of the arm. So we go to the backside here. And most of the stuff on the backside is attached to the lateral epicondyle, not the medial epicondyle. And on my list, I got, what do I have? I got three muscles there. So we got an extensor carpi radialis and ulnaris. So instead of flexor, now we got extensor. And then we also, on the back side, the back muscles don't have to be as strong as the forearm muscles. The flexion of the hand and fingers is much more important than the extension in terms of lifting things and manipulating things. And so in the back, we have, fairly superficial, we also have an extensor digitorum. And digitorum refers to digit. So that's a finger extensor. We got a couple in the front. We got a flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis, but they're underneath the flexor carpi muscles. So we don't really study them in this section. But they're, fairly, interchangeable, the front muscles and the back muscles. You need them both. You just don't need to have as much strength in the back. So lateral epicondyle, the extensor carpi ulnaris, guess what? Goes to the pinky side. So if we're doing the lab tonight, and I'll show it on the model. But you want to orient yourself. There's so many muscles up here. You just kind of, if there's a muscle that I tag that's on the outside going to the pinky, it will be the extensor carpi ulnaris. If it's a muscle that goes from the lateral epicondyle to the thumb side, it's going to be the extensor carpi radialis. Actually, the extensor carpi radialis has a longus and the brevis. Brevis means short, longus means long. And so it actually is composed of two parts of the muscle. So this here is the brevis and this is the longus. I'm not, differentiating them, because these muscles, there's so many, are mostly, I want you to sort of know them from where they go to where they go. And then when I tag that on the test, and that's the muscle I have tagged. And so you don't have to study all the other ones as well and get confused, because it can get I get confused in these wrist things. I always have to look stuff up when I work on people with this. I mean, not everything, but a lot of things, deeper stuff. And so then, so that's the extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi radialis, and then we got one in the middle that you can see the tendons go all the way to the finger. And that's also, Jeffrey, that is a lot of how we can tell muscle, which one it is, by where do the tendons go, or where does it start. So if it's just a mess of meat in here, you couldn't differentiate maybe. You have to go to the end and say, oh, look, it goes all the way to the fingers. It's probably the extensor digitorum at that point. Good. And then we have one muscle that I did not talk about yet, and that's the brachioradialis. Look at that. We have another term, brachio, in here. Isn't that interesting? All these brachio things. Let's see, where is that muscle? Here it is. The brachioradialis starts at the distal end of the humerus in the front and goes to the tip of the radius, the styloid process of the radius. So it's known as the brachio, upper arm, radialis, all the way to the radius. And that muscle is interesting. It kind of holds up, it flexes. It's a weak flexor of the elbow, but it also pulls the wrist. So if you're holding something up where the thumb goes up, you're going to use the brachioradialis. It's a tennis elbow muscle. People get tennis elbow, they have a problem with the brachioradialis, because you often have not just in tennis, but that's where the term comes from. You often have sort of this holding, the wrist holding pattern where you have to pull upward, and that's brachioradialis motion. It's a very interesting muscle. It's quite involved in pain syndromes. That's where when they put a brace on, the elbow brace, where it's something holds this part down. It sort of like tries to mimic an insertion or an origin that goes into the humerus. So it doesn't pull as much on the humerus. It sort of reinforces it here, and that supposedly helps with the pain. But it's really kind of awkward, and I don't like that kind of brace myself. When we look, so it's a really cool muscle. When we look at the in situ in the body, the brachioradialis muscle, it's really hard to see here, but it's sort of, and I'll try to do a better job at the video in school, but it's a muscle that's sort of in between the front and the back muscles. So it sort of sticks out on the, on the crest, sort of on the thumb side, and then separates the front to the back muscles. And I'll make sure I'll point it out really as nice as possible on the model in school this evening. We do have class this evening for the people who like to come. All right, that's those muscles. Any questions to those muscles? We have too many people on. Let's see. It's this daylight savings time. Everybody's a little tired. Or at least, maybe I shouldn't project. Maybe I just am. But that seems pretty all right for you guys?
Yeah.
Good. Then we can basically don't have to go too much further. Sorry about that. You shouldn't see that. Oh, you didn't. So then let me just talk about the week real quick. But it's nothing fancy this week. We'll just keep going. So you guys keep doing the injury prevention evaluation thing. That's a 2-weeker. See, it's March 19th. So you can take your time a little. That's from last week. That carries over to this week. And then we basically just talk about the lower extremities and muscles, do some label and coloring on that. And then this one also, in this week, we're gonna start a pathology project. So let me briefly talk about that. What I want to do in the second part, or the last part, the third part of this semester, we're gonna go in groups of 3 people. We're gonna research a pathology of the group's choice. That, you check with me: diabetes, low back pain, cardiovascular, cancer, interesting stuff that interests you, or one of you at least. And then we want to study, or we want to research, what is the pathology. So one person in the group will research what is the pathology, what's the disease, not what is disease, what that specific disease is. You'll go like WebMD and do some research online. And then a second person looks into what treatments do we get offered from mainstream medical when we go to the doctor. And a lot of times that's, medication or surgery or different things, depending on. And then the third person, I want to research what else can you do as a person to help your affliction, to help that problem. And again, very often that goes back to the lifestyle assessment type stuff. But I want you to research that a little and see, what you come up with for the specific pathology. So I started doing that when I had a student who had to take her son to the ER and missed the test and was an asthma attack. And I'm like, so what did the doctor do? He's like, oh, gave him albuterol. I'm like, okay. Did they talk about milk and sugar stuff? Because that's very flame producing, and asthma has a problem with that. So it helps the asthma if you actually reduce milk intake and also carbohydrate stuff, sugary stuff. And she said, no, they didn't talk about any of that. She had no idea. And I said, oh, maybe as a makeup, maybe research what else could you do for your kid that you could do, that you have some power over. That's not just the medicine that maybe, you run out. You have to go to Walgreens and it's closed, or no, CVS at this point, not Walgreens anymore, I guess. Since
Yeah, because that's when you feed the mucus. Dairy products aren't really good for people who do have asthma.
Yeah, you have to be, you have to be careful with some of those.
Yeah.
But what I want you guys to do, then I realized, okay, if that knowledge is not transferred over from the necessarily the ER doc, maybe we miss some things. And so what I then want to do is I want to have you 3 people come together on a Zoom or something, even in class. Some people, now that we're going to class, there was somebody who did that there. We can meet a little early or so. And I want you to make a video, a very short, each person speaks like 2 minutes, nothing too fancy, 5, 6, 7 minute video for 3 people, but you're presenting all your stuff. So you're also making a PowerPoint or a presentation with it, with a lot of pictures. And I look at the presentation, and then before you make your little video, you know, we'll talk about it and make sure you have draft and then work it over a couple of times to really, you know, give you some tools, give a lot of you guys some tools to present and to do PowerPoints and to do some research. And so it's a project that it's a 5-6 week long project. So the first thing we do this week, we're just picking a group. So I want you guys to join a group. And you go do that by going into people. And then from people, you see this project groups. And then in the project group, you choose, and I have to still set up some of these groups actually. You choose one of the groups that you want to join. What you can do is you can either, you know, choose people that you like, know about, or you can also go into the every people tab and look at different people's, look at what different people do, or their what was that in the account thing, in the profile, look at their profile and say, hey, this person speaks to me or not, and I want to be with them or do that with them, or just randomly choose. I mean, it's, you know, it's not really that big of a deal. But the first thing I want you to do is this week, I just want you to sort of get your way into a group. And then we'll take it from there next week and start the process of doing some, you know, choose which pathology you guys want to work on, and then start choosing who wants to do which question or which part. And then from there, we take it from there. Okay, is that sensible? Any questions to that?
So we're gonna do a research study with 2 other people, basically.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you're researching on your own one part, but you're working with 2 other people. And the grading of it, of course, is that, you know, we want everybody to participate. And once you have somebody who doesn't participate, then, you know, they don't get any points. But, you know, it is a group project as support, but then also, of course, when I look at the grading, the rubrics and all that is, of course, individually, what do you do?
Okay. Are you gonna select the groups for us and put it in Canvas?
Yeah, if you guys don't choose a group, I'll just choose it for you at the end.
Yeah, I'm not very.
No.
If it was my option, I'd do it alone. But
well, no, we do want to also do a little.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's why I prefer you to pick for me. I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, I would prefer you pick it.
Yeah, I can do that too. That if people who hasn't joined the group at the end, you know, in a week or so when we do the next step, then I'll just put you guys in. Yeah, it's not a big deal from that perspective. It's just starting that process. Well, this week you don't really have to do much on that. And if you don't care, then you don't really have to do anything on that. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Got it.
That's it. Then at that, we can close it out and call it a day or a week.
Have a good day, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. See you later.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.